I stood in the center of the room, my heart racing as my husband Mark clinked a spoon against his champagne glass. The sound echoed through our living room, silencing the 40 friends and family members who had gathered for our 5th anniversary. Mark looked perfect. His suit was tailored, his smile was warm, and his hand rested gently on the small of my back. To everyone else, we were the golden couple, the perfect success story. 5 years ago, Mark began, his voice smooth and commanding, I made the best decision of my life. Sarah, you are my rock. And since you've always loved surprises, I wanted to give you something you'll never forget in front of the people who matter most. He handed me a small, beautifully wrapped box. It was heavy for its size. I felt a surge of genuine excitement. Maybe this was the fresh start we needed. Things had been tense lately. Late nights at the office, missed dinners, and a strange distance growing between us. I thought a gift like this was his way of saying he was coming back to me. My hands trembled slightly as I tore the silver paper. I heard a few people in the crowd gasp in anticipation. I lifted the lid, expecting to see a velvet jewelry case. Instead, I saw a plastic stick. It was a pregnancy test. 2 bright pink lines stared back at me. For a split second, my brain short-circuited. I wasn't pregnant. We hadn't even been trying for months because of his work schedule. I looked up at Mark, a confused smile forming on my lips, ready to tell him he'd made a mistake. But Mark wasn't looking at me with love. He was looking at me with a cold, terrifying intensity. Keep looking, Sarah, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. There's more. Underneath the test was a small USB drive and a folded piece of paper. I reached for the paper first. It wasn't a card. It was a receipt from a high-end clinic, dated 3 weeks ago. The patient name wasn't mine. It was Chloe's, my best friend, my maid of honor. The room went deathly silent. I looked toward the back of the room where Chloe was standing. Her face had gone completely white, her glass of wine shaking in her hand. I looked back at the box, then at the USB drive, my mind spinning into a dark abyss. Mark reached over and took the USB drive from the box. He walked toward the large TV we had set up for a slideshow of our wedding photos. I wanted everyone to see the truth, Mark said into the microphone, his voice devoid of any emotion, because some secrets are too big to keep. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a video of us. It was security footage from a hallway I didn't recognize. I watched in frozen horror as the door opened and 2 people walked into the frame, laughing and kissing. It was Chloe, and the man holding her wasn't Mark. It was my father. The silence in the room was so heavy, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. On the screen, the grainy footage continued to play. My father, a man I had looked up to my entire life, was whispering into Chloe's ear, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. They looked comfortable. They looked like a couple who had been doing this for a very long time. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. It was Mark. He wasn't comforting me. He was making sure I didn't collapse before the video finished. You see, Sarah, Mark's voice was a chilling whisper right next to my ear. Everyone thought I was the one pulling away. Everyone thought I was the problem, but I was just busy digging. I looked over at my mother. She was sitting in the front row, her face frozen in a mask of pure shock. Her eyes moved from the screen to my father, who was standing near the bar, his face turning a deep, guilty shade of red. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor. Dad? The word caught in my throat, barely a sound. Chloe finally broke. She dropped her wine glass, and the sound of shattering crystal seemed to snap everyone out of their trance. She turned to run for the door, but Mark's brother was already standing there, blocking the exit. This wasn't a party anymore. It was an ambush. You're not going anywhere, Chloe, Mark said, turning away from the TV. Not until we discuss the rest of the gift. I looked down at the pregnancy test, still sitting in the box in my hands. The 2 pink lines felt like they were burning through the plastic. If that test belonged to Chloe, and she was with my father, the room began to spin. My best friend wasn't just having an affair with my father. She was carrying my sibling. But then, Mark did something I didn't expect. He walked over to my father, but he didn't swing at him. He didn't scream. He handed him a legal envelope he had tucked under the dessert table. I know about the offshore accounts, Richard, Mark said, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. I know why you really hired Chloe as your consultant last year. It wasn't just for the affair. It was to move the money Sarah and I invested in your firm. I gasped. My father's eyes finally snapped up, filled with a sudden, sharp panic. He didn't care about the affair being exposed. He cared about the money. Suddenly, I realized this wasn't just about a betrayal of the heart. It was a calculated heist. My father and my best friend had been draining our life savings while we were planning our future. But as I looked at Mark's face, the triumphant, almost manic glint in his eyes, a new, even more terrifying thought hit me. How long had Mark known? And why did he wait until tonight, in front of everyone, to reveal it? I looked back at the USB drive. There was a second file on the screen that hadn't been opened yet. It was labeled The Contract. "Mark," I whispered, reaching for his arm. "What is that?" He looked down at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't anger. It was pity. "That," Mark said, "is the reason your father didn't act alone." My hand dropped from Mark's arm as the file opened. The screen showed a scanned document, a legal agreement with a signature at the bottom that made my stomach do a slow, sickening flip. It was my own signature, or at least it looked exactly like mine. "I never signed this," I whispered, the words feeling like dry sand in my mouth. "I know you didn't," Mark replied, his voice echoing through the silent room. "But Chloe did. She's been signing your name on power of attorney documents for 18 months. Your father didn't just steal our savings, Sarah. He used your identity to take out millions in loans to cover his gambling debts, loans that are now legally your responsibility." I turned to look at Chloe. She was backed against the wall, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes weren't filled with regret. They were filled with fear, the kind of fear a cornered animal has. "Sarah, I had to," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Your father, he told me he'd take care of me. He said you had so much, you wouldn't even notice it was gone until he tripled it." My father finally spoke, his voice booming but hollow. "It was a temporary arrangement, Sarah. A business move. Mark was never supposed to find the ledger." "But I did," Mark said, stepping toward my father. "And I found something else, too. Something Chloe didn't even tell you, Richard." Mark pointed to the pregnancy test I was still holding. "That test? It didn't come from your consultant's bathroom, Richard. I found it in our guest room trash bin 2 days ago. But here's the twist. Chloe isn't the only one who's been staying in that guest room while I was away at work." Mark turned the remote toward the TV one last time. A new video started playing. It wasn't security footage this time. It was a recording from a hidden camera inside our own home. The video showed my mother. She was sitting at our kitchen table with Chloe. They weren't fighting, they were laughing. My mother handed Chloe a thick envelope stuffed with cash. "Make sure he stays distracted," my mother's voice came through the speakers, clear and cold. "If Sarah finds out her father is bankrupt before the divorce papers are filed, she'll try to save him, and I want every dime that's left for myself." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My husband had known. My father was a thief. My best friend was pregnant with my father's child. And my mother was the architect of the whole thing. The room began to tilt. I looked at the faces of my family, the people I loved most, and realized I was standing in a room full of strangers. Every one of them had a price, and apparently mine was the only life being sold. "Why?" I choked out, looking at my mother. "Why would you do this to me?" My mother stood up slowly, smoothing her expensive silk dress. She didn't look ashamed. She looked disappointed that she'd been caught. "Because, Sarah," she said calmly, "you were always too much like your father. Too trusting. Too weak. I spent 30 years building this life, and I wasn't going to let his failures take me down with him." Mark stepped between us, his face a mask of cold fury. "There's one more thing you all should know," he announced to the room. "The police are outside, and I'm not just talking about the fraud." He looked directly at Chloe, who suddenly clutched her stomach. "Tell them, Chloe," Mark prompted. "Tell them whose baby that really is." Chloe's mouth hung open, but no sound came out. She looked at my father, then at Mark, her eyes darting like she was looking for an exit that didn't exist. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the muffled sound of a police siren growing louder in the distance. "It's not Richard's, is it?" Mark asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Chloe sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "He promised me he'd leave her. He promised me we'd have everything." "Who, Chloe?" I screamed, the box in my hands hitting the floor with a plastic thud. "Who promised you?" She looked up, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. She didn't point at my father. She pointed at the man standing right next to me. She pointed at Mark. The world stopped. I felt the air leave my lungs. I turned to look at my husband, the man who had spent the last 20 minutes systematically destroying my parents and my best friend in the name of the truth. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. He just stared at Chloe with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You really thought I'd choose you?" Mark said, his voice cold enough to freeze my blood. "You were a tool, Chloe. You were the bridge I needed to get into Richard's accounts. You were the one who gave me the passwords. You were the one who helped me prove my mother-in-law was a snake." "You used her," I whispered, moving away from him. "You slept with my best friend to get back at my parents?" "I did what I had to do to protect us, Sarah," Mark snapped, finally showing a crack in his armor. "Your father was going to leave us penniless. Your mother was going to let it happen. I played the game better than they did. I got the money back, all of it. It's in an account they can't touch. But the baby," I gestured wildly at the floor. "You're having a child with her?" Mark let out a short, dry laugh. "There is no baby, Sarah. Check the date on that test again. It's from a kit I bought and marked myself. I knew if I put a positive test in that box, Chloe would be too panicked to deny it. I knew she'd crumble and start confessing everything just to save her own skin." Chloe looked like she had been struck. She touched her stomach, realization washing over her. She wasn't pregnant. She had been played just as hard as I had. "You're a monster," my mother hissed, standing up. "You've ruined everything." "No," Mark said, checking his watch. "I've cleared the trash. The police are here for the fraud, Richard. And for you, mother-in-law, I have the recordings of you soliciting Chloe to commit identity theft." The front door kicked open. Red and blue lights strobed against the walls. Officers moved into the room, and within seconds, my father and mother were being led away in handcuffs, shouting threats and pleas that fell on deaf ears. Mark stood in the middle of the chaos, looking like a king who had just won a war. He turned to me, reaching out a hand. "It's over, Sarah. They're gone. We're safe now. We have the money, and we have our life back." I looked at his hand, the same hand that had held me while he was plotting to destroy my family, the same hand that had used my best friend's greed to dismantle my world. "Is it really in an account they can't touch?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Every cent," he promised. "And whose name is on that account, Mark?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to see the final, darkest truth. "It's in a trust," he said smoothly, "for our future." I realized then that I wasn't the survivor of this story. I was the prize, and Mark hadn't saved me. He had just gained total control over me. But Mark forgot one thing. He wasn't the only one who had been watching the cameras. Mark's smile faltered as I pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't look at the screen. I looked him dead in the eye. "You're right about one thing, Mark," I said, my voice finally steady. "Some secrets are too big to keep. But you've been so busy playing God that you forgot I'm the one who manages our home security subscription. You changed the passwords on the cameras, but you didn't change the recovery email. It's still linked to my old tablet." I turned the phone screen toward him. It showed a video from 3 nights ago, the night he thought I was asleep. In the video, Mark wasn't with Chloe. He was in his home office, speaking into a burner phone. "The transfer is almost complete," Mark's recorded voice said. "Once I trigger the anniversary reveal, the police will take Richard and his wife. Chloe will be the scapegoat. Sarah will be so traumatized, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her. By the time she realizes the trust is only in my name, I'll be halfway to Singapore." The room went silent again, but this time, it was Mark who looked like a cornered animal. The officers, who were still in the foyer, paused. One of them stepped forward, reaching for my phone. "Mark," I whispered, "you didn't save our money. You stole it. From them and from me. You didn't do this to protect me. You did this because you're just as greedy as my mother and just as much of a liar as my father." The officer looked at the video, then at the digital trail of the burner phone conversation I had already forwarded to the precinct, an hour before the party started. "Mark Davis," the officer asked, stepping toward my husband, "you're under investigation for wire fraud and grand larceny." The golden couple was gone. In less than an hour, my husband, my parents, and my best friend were all being led out in the same fleet of police cars. Our perfect home was now a crime scene, littered with silver wrapping paper and shattered wine glasses. I stood alone in the center of the living room. The heavy weight of the last 5 years was finally gone, but the silence was haunting. I looked down at the pregnancy test Mark had faked, the little plastic stick that started this whole explosion. I picked it up and threw it into the fireplace. I lost my family, my marriage, and my best friend tonight. But as I watched the flames lick the plastic, I realized for the first time in my life, I wasn't being managed, manipulated, or lied to. I was finally free. The money was gone, but the truth was mine, and that was a price I was finally willing to pay. Would you have stayed quiet to keep the money, or would you have burned it all down for the truth?